Hola, hola, amiga. We recently celebrated our littlest one's first birthday, our little Mateo, and we celebrated it with a bang. I mean, we celebrated with friends, family, and it was such a cute birthday. If you haven't seen my Instagram reel yet, I encourage you to see it because you'll see a little glimpse of what we did and how the theme fits so well for this little guy. But in addition to celebrating his birthday, I am personally celebrating a big milestone, and that is our breastfeeding anniversary. And I know for many people, this may sound kind of weird, or maybe you've never heard of this, because really in our comunidad, you hear a lot of mixed emotions about breastfeeding. And so I really want to be cautious about what you think. And maybe this isn't your thing. And if it's not, you're welcome to skip this episode to next week's episode if you like. But for me, on a personal level, this is a big accomplishment. Breastfeeding was something that I've always wanted to do when I became a mom for the first time. But as someone who is now reflecting on my breastfeeding journey the second time around with my second baby, it has been completely different. I mean, like full 180 degrees here. And so on this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you all just like what this second time around looks like in my breastfeeding journey and how this experience has been very different than my first. But also I'm going to share you 4 different ways that has helped me be an exclusive breastfeeding mama. And hopefully this can help you, especially if you are expecting or if you have a newborn and you're just like not sure if you want to do this or not. There are many components in which you can consider to have this be a part of your goal. And so stay tuned so that way you can hear a little bit more about my story, but also ways in which you can feel empowered to make your breastfeeding journey successful in whatever capacity you'd want it to be. Welcome to the Viva la Mami podcast. I am your host, Jessica Cuevas. I am a mother of 2 on a mission to help redefine the meaning of motherhood as a modern Latina mom. Motherhood can be a complex journey, interwoven in 2 identities that often make us feel ni de aquí ni de allá. Viva la Mami is committed to providing you with knowledge, tools, and support to navigate the challenges and triumphs of motherhood as Latina moms. On the show, we'll be discussing culturally relevant topics that will help inform and empower you in whichever season you are in on your motherhood journey. We'll be joined by Latina moms, experts and professionals who can offer advice, practical tips, relatable stories, and honest conversations. So bring your cafecito as I invite you to be a part of this space as we create comunidad about the exciting and challenging parts of being a mommy. Ahora, vámonos. It has been a year since my littlest Mateo was born, and while we celebrated his first year, I am also celebrating an important milestone, and that is our breastfeeding anniversary. I did not know that I would get this far in my breastfeeding journey because let me tell y'all, the first time around when I became a mom to Diego 3 years ago, my breastfeeding journey was so different. And something that I have learned is that I have been able to embrace both breastfeeding journeys. I have been able to really celebrate both of them because regardless if things didn't go our way, we can still acknowledge the fact that either we gave it a try or that we decided to make the decision that works best for us and for our baby. And you have that sort of level of empowerment to make that decision. And so I think it is important to celebrate this big milestone, because either if you raised a formula fed baby the first year, well, guess what? You don't have to spend a penny on formula. That is a big milestone. But also, if you've exclusively breastfed a baby for the first year, well, guess what? You're going on to this new transition of either weaning or not breastfeeding as much as you did when you had a newborn. And so for me, I am celebrating this big milestone because breastfeeding is a lot of work. And I think that as a breastfeeding mom, like full-time breastfeeding mom, I want to celebrate this. And so this is kind of like the premise of this episode, but I'll also be sharing you how my breastfeeding journey the second time around was so different than my first, and 4 different components that really helped me to be successful in this journey. And so if you haven't been with me for long, I did share very briefly my breastfeeding experience when I had Diego, my first, in 2 episodes that I had on the second season of the Viva la Mami podcast. And I interviewed Ileana Berrios, who is an IBCLC and the founder of Breastfeeding Latinas, which is episode 32. And I briefly talked about my experience in not having the adequate support through my breastfeeding journey. And then on episode 36, I interviewed Cassie Reyes, who is another IBCLC, and I briefly talked about my relactation story. And so I almost feel like I should do a separate episode. And so if you want me to, let me know, whether if it's on DMs on Instagram at Viva la Mami, or you can send me an email at podcast@vivalamami.com. But my breastfeeding journey the first time around was so different. And so, sort of in a nutshell, I have always wanted to breastfeed. Okay, this was my goal. And the reason why is because in my family, which I find it kind of interesting, in my family, I grew up mostly seeing babies being bottle fed. And not to shame or anything like that, but when I became pregnant, I began to do research and ways in which I can either reclaim my cultura and kind of, embrace my culture and heritage and to be connected with my ancestors and things like that. And I realized that breastfeeding is such a big component of our culture, where many of my cousins, close family members in my generation, they did not really breastfeed. And I think there are many layers to this. Most of it is because of the lack of support that many Black and brown women get, either at the hospital when they're giving birth, or they don't receive the adequate support through IBCLCs, or maybe there aren't even, international board certified lactation consultants at the hospital, where they don't provide that individualized help. And then, of course, there could be some systemic barriers, such as like returning back to work, and how pumping in itself is just so difficult. And so there are many layers to this that maybe I haven't really asked my family members about, like, why did you decide to not breastfeed? But for me, at least, the goal was that I wanted to breastfeed. And so when Diego was born, I had this vision about putting him on my breast, and I kind of envisioned this to be a natural process, because many of us think of it that way. But unfortunately, it was not. I mean, he didn't latch well, and I really didn't get him to be on my breast properly. And so for the first 3 days of his life, it was madness. I mean, I didn't know really how to put him on my breast, even after working with a doula virtually because this was in the pandemic. So we weren't able to really meet in person. And also, I attended all of these like breastfeeding sessions and webinars and things like that online. And even through all of these resources, I still couldn't get him to latch. And so, after a desperate call with the pediatrician's office, they said, well, while you're trying to establish your milk supply and kind of work this on your own, sort of thing, they said, you got to give him formula. Because obviously, from a pediatrician standpoint, they want the baby to be fed in order for the baby to grow. And so I guess I didn't really get my questions answered, and I didn't really know how to really advocate for myself because, first of all, I don't really know what type of questions to ask. I mean, I already experienced white coat syndrome. And for me to just kind of get this resolved, I just like defaulted to what their recommendations were. And instead of me sort of reaching out to an actual professional like IBCLC, I just defaulted to what the pediatrician said. And depending on the type of pediatrician practices and all of that, like some of them are true advocates for breastfeeding moms. Others are not so educated enough on breastfeeding in general. And so one quick tip, if you ever are looking for a pediatrician that is breastfeeding friendly, you want to make sure that you ask those questions, right? And making sure that they respect and understand your journey and your goals if in case you were to experience a similar situation like mine, for example. And because I was sort of combo feeding, right? I was trying to get him to latch and fed him formula. And they also encouraged me to pump while he was feeding a bottle. Like I was basically triple feeding Diego during this time. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. This is intense. What am I doing? And finally, I went to the hospital where they mentioned that there were lactation consultants that are able to help me. And I don't know why I did that. I should have just like reached out to like an actual IBCLC who comes home to you. But whatever. I decided to go to the hospital and get an appointment there. And granted, these were not IBCLCs. They were just like LCs. And there's a difference in certification, education, and training. But whatever, this was my first time and I really didn't know much about breastfeeding. I just knew that I wanted to breastfeed, really. And so when I went to the hospital, I was just like informed very differently. I had different expectations about like how to actually get your baby to latch, but it was just like a 5-minute visit and it was not effective. I felt like I didn't receive the support that I needed. And so I left without really nothing that I learned any different from. And so it was just a very frustrating experience. I then decided to throw the towel and I decided to just stop breastfeeding. And this was 5 weeks postpartum with Diego. I decided to do this because I thought that I was not producing enough. I thought that I had extremely low milk supply, that my baby would cry, that he was just like not satisfied. And I was very obsessed with my apps on the phone where I was just like counting the minutes. I was counting each time on the breast because I was told like, if you feed your baby 15 minutes on each side, that should be fine. But for some reason, deep down, my instincts told me, no, you should feed your baby more. But because I listened to these lactation consultants and also because of these apps that I had and I was timing them, like I just thought that, okay, well, I guess my session is over. And so that ultimately affected my milk supply. That ultimately affected a lot of like, you know, things that really I wasn't just listening to my gut. And because of all of that, I decided to wean him like cold turkey. Okay. I didn't even like transition. Like, no, I just like stopped. So then during this process, I was fine with formula feeding because for me, even though I felt sort of like peace with Diego being fed formula, deep down inside, I didn't want that. I didn't want that to be the goal. That wasn't part of the plan, if you will. And because the person that I am, I was like, what are other ways in which I can reintroduce Diego to my breast? And so I started to do research, and coincidentally enough, I was going on YouTube and I saw Cassie Reyes's like YouTube video about how to relactate. And I never heard about relactation. I always assumed that once a mom stops breastfeeding, se secan, right? Like you dry up. But I never knew that if you stimulate your breast, like you can actually relactate, especially if you just had a baby. And this was during the first, like, I don't know, I would say like the first 8 weeks when I really was like, oh, what if I do this or not? Like, so I started to do a lot of research. This was 8 weeks postpartum. And I reached out to my midwife and I was like, this is what it is. I am crying. I'm just like, I'm not sure if this is like postpartum depression or if it's something that I actually want to do. And so I made an appointment. She told me to come in and we talked it through. And she's like, okay, you made the decision to wean your baby, but now you're telling me that you want to bring him back to your breast to breastfeed. Why do you want this? And at that time, this was during the pandemic, and this was when the vaccines were introduced. I felt so much pressure because, and really no one was putting this pressure on me, but I put this pressure on myself where I felt very guilty weaning Diego off from breastfeeding. And during that time, it was when the vaccines were introduced. So like I was feeling very guilty about not passing on those antibodies from the vaccine and all of that so that I can protect him. And I just felt very guilty. And also, I just wanted that feeling, that sort of sensation to breastfeed him. Like that was always the goal, that was always the plan. And I didn't get to experience that. So those two were sort of like my main reasons why I decided to go through this relactation process. This is a very long story. I apologize. But at 12 weeks postpartum, I started to officially relactate him. When I went over with my midwife and asked if she knew of any lactation consultant, she was like, actually, I do know a lactation consultant that is an IBCLC, and she has helped patients of mine either relactate or induce lactation. And inducing lactation is basically when you have not had a baby, but you stimulate your body to produce milk. Like y'all, our bodies are just magical. This is something that our bodies can do, especially for like adoptive parents who want to breastfeed. There are ways to do that. And so I hired her and she helped me. She and I created a plan to meet my goals. And my goal was to at least feed him like a little bit of milk. I understood that perhaps at that time I was 3 months postpartum. Like I understood that at that time I probably wouldn't produce all of it for me to exclusively breastfeed him, but I was content with at least giving him part of it and the rest formula. So throughout that process, I was combo feeding. And combo feeding, this is a new sort of word, even though many, many, many mamas, especially in our community, do this. Combo feeding is basically when you partially give breast milk to your baby and partially give formula to your baby. And this is very normal. This is very common. but the language wasn't out there until just recently. And so this was what I did with Diego. All right. If you want to learn a little bit more about my relactation story, I also provide like ways on how to relactate. I have a whole series of blog posts on my website, which is vivalamami.com. I've also shared this in my stories and it's on my highlights on Instagram. But this was a process, y'all. Now, the second time when I found out that we were pregnant, that we were expecting, I had the intention to breastfeed again, but I was open to let it be the way it would be. I was open to whether formula feed exclusively or breastfeed. At this time, I didn't want it to be too harsh on myself because I felt like I was pretty rigid on myself the first time around, that it did cause a lot of mental breakdowns. It did cause a lot of mental distress because I was working so hard to like stimulate my breasts, to like relactate, and also taking care of a newborn. And it was just a lot. And so the second time around, I was like, okay, my goal is to breastfeed, but if it doesn't work, I'll be fine with it. Now, when Mateo was born, he wasn't really interested in my boobs. Like, usually you see videos of like little babies crawling up, on mom and all of a sudden latching. Like, this kid was not hungry. And this was already like an hour. This was after the golden hour, and I was like, what is going on? My baby's not hungry. And so the nurses, even my doula, was like, okay, just let it be. Okay, let's stimulate your breast. Let's show baby that there's some magic here. There's some food. And he couldn't latch. And I was like, great. And so what they had me do was stimulate my breast and feed him with a spoon, which for me was so different. Now, granted, this was the same hospital. This was almost the same team of people. The only difference was that there were different lactation consultants. And I don't know if this was something that might have been a huge impact, which for me is sort of interesting. But I think through the support of my doula, I was, she was advocating for me. And so Mateo had my breast milk through a spoon. And if y'all never heard of spoon feeding, like, this is a thing, okay? Once we brought Mateo back home, I did contact a lactation consultant like automatically. And this was through the Lactation Network, which is a database, a sort of a directory of lactation consultants that are IBCLC. So they are board certified lactation consultants, and they come to you. You find one that is locally, and I literally found one who lived like 5 minutes away from where we lived. And so she came in, I think it was like within the first week Mateo was born, and she was helping me how to like prop him, and she checked his latch and everything, his mouth, and everything was fine. It's just that he probably needed this additional push to sort of have him latch. And yeah, and it all worked out, honestly. And as I reflect on this 1 year anniversary of breastfeeding Mateo, my approach was a lot different. I was a lot sort of open and more willing to see what comes to me than me trying to control everything. And so 4 things that really helped me to be an exclusive breastfeeding mom was that first of all, I was able to read my baby's hunger cues without depending on an app on my phone or a timer, assuming that he would get full after a specific amount of time. I know that pediatricians ask the question all the time about how long did you feed your baby on each breast, or how much milk? And I'm like, how am I supposed to like measure how much milk I gave him? Okay, my boobs ain't transparent, like, how am I supposed to tell? And so I let go of that sort of anxiety that I had from the first time. Like, I just guesstimated. And, pediatricians are not judges, or, it's not like you are under oath and you're lying or whatever. No, like, they're probably just putting it down on the chart and that's it. And maybe it could be for statistics. I have no idea. But I gave them a guesstimate. I was like, oh, my son is with me. I don't know. My son feeds every 15 to 20 minutes on each boob, like whatever. And so I wasn't so like rigid on timing our breastfeeding sessions, because I sort of just let it to Mateo to decide when he was full. And there are cues when a baby, especially a newborn, is full. And actually, I'm going to share all these resources in the show notes on my blog. And that way you get to read more about those resources. There are some really great websites that are evidence-based and not just like opinion-based. So I'll share that with you. The second component of why my breastfeeding experience was successful the second time around is that I trusted my body. Like, y'all, like, I always thought that I had low milk supply. But guess what? Like, I think I was just around enough to, like, I think I produced a lot. That was something that my lactation consultant told me. And that was because I was able to just, like, trust the process. I trusted my body to trust the process. And I trusted my body for it to nourish my baby. Like, that was the ultimate goal, right? And even if I was just an enougher, or, if I felt like I didn't produce much, like, I knew that my baby was okay. And so this was something that I let go of, whether if thinking that I was making enough for my baby. Your baby will let you know. Trust me. The third component is that I reached out for professional support immediately. And like I said, I went to the Lactation Network, and I love the Lactation Network because it actually asks you about your insurance information. So like, if you are insured, you don't even have to go through the hassle of like collecting a super bill and then trying to get the claim done through your insurance, or, there's so much like processes with that. But the Lactation Network literally connects you with an IBCLC that is in network with your insurance. And if you do not have insurance, on my blog, I do share ways in which you can receive support with minimal costs. And sometimes it's a matter of being a part of a community, like a Facebook group. Like, yes, it is anecdotal information. It's not really evidence-based information, but sometimes hearing it from other moms helps you get more, helps you receive like better insight about their experiences that you can learn from. Also, WIC provides breastfeeding support. These are breastfeeding peer counselors that have also gone through their own breastfeeding experiences. This is a gig that I've always wanted to do, but I've never really dared myself to do it. But they are just like people, like moms, who are willing to help other moms in their breastfeeding journey. And you don't have to pay for anything. You do have to meet specific an income bracket, but if you are a good candidate, like, I would highly encourage you to consider them. And so regardless, like, I really want you to receive professional help, if anything, like as soon as possible, as soon as your baby is born. And the reason why is because you'll know who to reach out to if you experience some difficult moments. Like, for example, oh my gosh, when I had Mateo, I think he was around like 3 months, where I got mastitis. I never thought that I would get mastitis, but I did. And had it not been that I've already established a relationship really with my IBCLC, I like immediately reached out to her, and then I reached out to my healthcare provider, and yeah, it was madness. Like, I almost don't remember what happened because it was very painful, but luckily I had the support system on a professional standpoint where I was able to reach out to them. The first 3 months of your postpartum journey are just madness. And so might as well have a team of professional support from either a doula or a midwife or your OB, and especially an IBCLC who can help you in your breastfeeding journey. And then finally, the last component that made my breastfeeding journey successful the second time around is that I leaned in with my support system for help. And so my husband, Alex, has been very supportive in my decision of breastfeeding. I know that many men are kind of weirded about that, and that is so not right about this because this is a woman's decision for her wanting to feed her baby. Okay, there's nothing weird about this. All right, we are mammals for a reason. And I really appreciate him whenever he knew that Mateo was like hungry. So he either like held him and then took him over to me. And then he's till this day, he's like bringing out my nursing cover. And for me personally, I like to cover myself because I just don't want to go through problems. Isn't it funny how I've already like envisioned this like scenario in my head about like someone confronting me and telling me crap about like, oh, you shouldn't breastfeed in public. But yeah, like I don't want to go through those problems. So like I just cover myself and my baby. Lately I haven't really much because he's now like very squirmy and he's just like not even wanting to cover himself. I'm like, whatever, I'm just not going to cover you. But in the beginning months, like he would bring it over and he would bring the baby over, or, I would ask him for water and he'll refill my water bottle. And so it feels really great when I have had that support because, like I said, breastfeeding is very hard. Like it is a full-time job in itself. I also loved that my mom, for example, especially during la cuarentena, the first 40 days of my postpartum period, like she fed me. Like it was so nice that she made me el caldo de albóndigas. She made me atole. She made me this awesome, like, I don't know what it was. It was like an atole style type, champurrado style type, like oatmeal. I don't know. It was like a combination of things, but it was a very great drink that she made to help me produce my milk supply. And y'all, like, honestly, I think that's what helped. I'm going to ask her for the recipe and I'll probably write a blog post about this because it was so good. And so getting that support from like your family, your friends, many of my family, like they're just amazed that I was able to breastfeed Mateo exclusively. Like that is sort of unheard of, specifically in my generation, in my sort of circle. Like I am basically the only one so far that has exclusively breastfed a baby. And y'all, when I mean by exclusively breastfeeding, I mean like this kid never wanted the bottle. Okay. And I know that this is a privilege in itself that I was able to have my baby with me for his first year, like full time. I left my 9 to 5 job right after my maternity leave. And because of that, I was like, you know what? I guess I'm not going to use the pump. And part of it, there are times when I do regret not introducing him the bottle or continuing on with giving him the bottle. I kind of gave him the bottle like the first couple of weeks within the first 3 months. But then afterwards I was like, pumping, it's another job in itself. But I kind of regretted because there were moments, especially like when we went to Mexico for 3.5 weeks with my family, like I wanted to go out on a date with Alex, but guess what? I couldn't because this kiddo was always on my boob. And now that we're transitioning out of this first year, and it feels a lot better where I don't have to be constantly sort of on the clock, making sure that my baby is like fed. This kid loves solids, and I think we're going to go with this route. I am not really weaning him. I'm going to let him choose whenever he's ready, and obviously whenever I am ready. With Diego, even though I combo fed him and then nursed him for comfort after his first year, he self-weaned at like 22 months, like 2 months before his second birthday. And that was because I was pregnant. I think my milk tasted a little different. Now with Mateo, because he is our last, we'll see where it goes. But as long as I'm okay and he's okay, and, we'll just let it be. And some things that I have learned now as an exclusive breastfeed mom is that, I have received a couple side comments or questions that it's like, well, this is, first of all, unsolicited advice or unexpected questions, or questions that are a little bit rude from family members. Like, one big one that I have received is, when are you going to stop breastfeeding him? Or another one's like, oh, he needs to get off that boob. And it's like, well, I understand that maybe this is something that you see kind of weird or off, but like, as long as I'm okay and he's okay, like, that's all what matters. And it's so interesting, like, regardless if you are a formula mom or a pumping mom or a breastfeeding mom, and I hate all of these labels, like, we are still going to receive these rude comments, these uncomfortable questions, these sort of things that you feel attacked with. And it shouldn't be this way. But just stand up for yourself. If you don't want to answer those questions, like, just leave it like that. Be like, I don't feel like answering this question right now. I should probably do another episode on that. But yeah, these were the 4 big components about why my breastfeeding journey the second time around was successful. I hope that this was helpful for you. I know that this is a long episode than I originally expected, but this was something that I really wanted to talk about because it's not only a big milestone for me personally, but also if you are someone who is planning to breastfeed your baby. Again, if you are expecting, or if you are in the first couple of weeks in your breastfeeding journey, like, as long as you are okay, as long as this is something that you want to do and that your baby wants to do, you can create your own version of your breastfeeding journey the way that you both want it to be. You shouldn't feel pressured. You shouldn't feel guilty. You shouldn't feel shamed. Regardless of whatever journey you're in, make sure that you are okay and baby's okay. That's all what matters. All right, amiga. Well, thanks so much for listening. Hasta la próxima, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Mujer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to the Viva la Mami podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, will you do me a favor and follow the podcast and leave a rating and review? Hitting that follow button and reviewing my show will allow other mommies like you find this podcast. Your review will also tell me if you enjoy the show, so I would truly appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget, please share this podcast con tus amigas. Also, make sure to follow me at Viva la Mami on Instagram or visit vivalamami.com. Please note the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. Okay, mujer, thank you for joining y nos vemos in the next episode.